We are just 2 weeks away from the start of the NFL season, which means we are at the peak of drafting season. So today we're going to be discussing 9 players at running back and wide receiver that you should be looking to draft in your upcoming fantasy drafts. Listen, we are focused on ceiling around here. Ceiling is what wins championships, especially once you get to the later rounds of the draft. The hit rate are so low on players in this range that we shouldn't be focused on drafting players like a Keaton Allen, who's probably not going to provide you much of a ceiling. Yes, he can be a little bit of a safety blanket and offer you some usable weeks, but we're looking for home runs here. Players that are going to put you over the top, that are going to get you to the playoffs, and that can win you fantasy championships. That is what we're focused on today. So let's go ahead and start here. We're going to start with the running backs first. And the first thing that I did want to mention is obviously over the weekend, Sunday night, we had a huge scare with Ashton Jeanty. Sounded like he was going to be out for the season with a torn ACL. Well, it came down that so far what we know now is just a sprained ankle. But we had Mike Washington all of a sudden flying up draft boards on Fantasy Pros real-time ADP. He jumped up 40 spots overnight. Now, the good news is it doesn't sound like Ashton Jeanty's injury is going to be season-ending. Adam Schefter said that it's not going to be a long-term injury for him, so that is a plus. But we're still waiting for more information. I do think either way, Mike Washington is a good value, is somebody that we should be looking to draft. He has looked really good in the preseason, and he is somebody with that contingent upside we'd be looking to draft. But let's get into the other players that I really want to hit on today. But I wanted to talk about that situation because that is probably one of the hottest topics right now in the fantasy space right now. So we're going to start with my first player that we're going to talk about is going to be Blake Corum, RB35 or 98th overall. Now, Corum is one of the best players that I think you can draft in the later rounds right now because of not just ceiling, but also offers you something in standalone value. He finished last year with 745 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. He also ranked inside the top 5 in explosive run rate, yards per carry, and rushing success rate last year. Now, we received plenty of reports from camp that this should be much more of a 50-50 split this year with him and Kyren Williams. Now, I would like to see more usage in the passing game because last year, Kyren Williams was the pass-catching back. He ran 47% of the routes compared to just 15% for Blake Corum last year. Corum's 2.5% target share was also absolutely abysmal. If he's going to be more than just a 2-down grinder back, he's going to need more volume to be utilized as a flex option. Where what really lies, though, in his upside is going to be if something were to happen to Kyren Williams, because if an injury occurred, he would easily be a top 12 running back and with top 5 upside due to the volume that he would see. In the meantime, he should still be a high-end RB3 with RB2 upside if this does become a 50-50 split. So Blake Corum was one of my favorite players to draft once you get into the 9th round. Next up is going to be Jordan Mason, RB37, 104th overall. Now, last year he averaged 11 carries per game, 758 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns. He averaged 8.1 fantasy points per game. Now, this was on a terrible, terrible offense that the Vikings were last year, but he was really efficient on a per-touch basis. He ranked 7th in yards after contact per attempt, 13th in yards per carry. He was explosive, coming in 11th in explosive run rate last year. Now, Aaron Jones is still there. I do anticipate Aaron Jones to be the pass-catching, change of pace back, but Jordan Mason should be the guy that handles the majority of the early down work and also a lot of the goal line work as well. So I think this offense is going to be much better than it was last year. It also really helps that their schedule is fantastic this year, especially for the running backs. They have the second easiest running back schedule this year for fantasy running backs, and their fantasy playoff looks pretty good too against the Lions, Commanders, and Jets to close out there. So really like Jordan Mason as a later round option. Next up is going to be Marshawn Lloyd, RB55. Now, the training camp buzz has been absolutely electric for Marshawn Lloyd, who's entering his 3rd season in the league, but he's only played in 1 game due to dealing with several soft tissue injuries. So far, he stayed completely healthy, and we've heard nothing but positives about him. Now, Josh Jacobs is expected to be the lead back here, but he's currently dealing with a little bit of a groin injury, though he did just recently return to practice. But he also has a chance at serving a suspension. But at this point, with us being so close to the season, I don't think that's probably going to happen, but there's still at least a possibility that it could happen. Now, beyond the injuries, Josh Jacobs last year had his least efficient season last year, averaging just 3.6 yards per carry. We also saw a little bit of a decline in usage. He played 60% of the snaps. Now, that was also had to do with some of the injuries that he was suffering, and they were trying to preserve him. So I wouldn't be surprised at 28 years old if they do see something similar to what we saw last year with like a 60% snap share for him. And that's where I think Marshawn Lloyd comes in, because he has looked absolutely explosive, not just at camp, but also in his preseason action that he's seen so far. I think he offers standalone value because I think he's going to be the pass catcher here in this backfield, somebody that comes in on 3rd downs, somebody that is utilized as change of pace. And if something were to happen to Josh Jacobs, then I think it's absolute wheels up for Marshawn Lloyd, who I think would be the lead back here and somebody that would handle the majority of the touches from this backfield. So Marshawn Lloyd is another player that I'm really excited about drafting. Now, next up, I did want to talk about some options here, I think, in PPR formats, maybe even half-point PPR formats, but really PPR formats. I want to talk about some of these backs that can offer standalone value, players you can plug into your lineup. Think somebody like last year with like Kenny Gainwell, who really took over and really started to become a very useful option later in the year. So I want to talk about some of those running backs as well for my people that are in PPR formats. The first is going to be Keaton Mitchell. Now, he's one of the most explosive running backs in the league. Since 2003, among running backs with at least 100-plus carries, this is where he ranks first in rushing yards over expectation. He also is the number 2 overall running back in yards per carry with 6.3. That is per Hayden Winks from Yahoo. Now, Mike McDaniel posted pictures in the facility all offseason before they signed him. Wanted posters. That's how bad he wanted Keaton Mitchell. He does profile somewhat similarly to Devon Achane in terms of size and his overall explosiveness. Now, I'm not saying he is Devon Achane, but I still think that there's a lot to like here with Keaton Mitchell. I think he carves out a role as a change of pace back and should see plenty of targets out of the backfield as well. I expect somewhere between 8 to 12 touches for him per game, and how explosive he is, he can get you there on less touches. So I like Keaton Mitchell a lot, especially if you forego and you don't draft Amarian Hampton early in rounds. Keaton Mitchell is somebody that I really like here, especially as a flex option that you can plug into your lineups. Next up is going to be Rachaad White. Now, he is with the Commanders. Well, I will say I prefer Ja'Cory Crosby-Merritt. Merritt is going outside of the range of players we're talking about. These are just players drafted in the 9th round and beyond. JCM right now is going in the 8th round, so he doesn't really qualify for this, but Rachaad White does. He definitely has standalone value as the pass catcher in this backfield. JCM isn't a pass catcher, or at least he wasn't utilized that way last year, receiving only a 2% target share, ran just 19% of the routes. Now, I will say both JCM and Rachaad White are dealing with some minor injuries, though it doesn't sound to be anything serious, anything we really have to worry about. But Rachaad White has been an excellent pass catcher throughout his career, and I think this is a role that he has on lockdown. Going back to 2024, though, I want to talk about that because that was the last year Jayden Daniels really played a full season, and I wanted to look at how he utilized his running backs as pass catchers. And Austin Eckler was on pace that year for 61 targets, and he received an 11% target share. So I think if White gets anywhere close to that, he is going to be a weekly option in PPR format, something that we're talking about as a top 36 in that 24 to 36 range on a weekly basis. And also, if Ja'Cory Crosby-Merritt doesn't get it done, we do know that Rachaad White is more than capable of carrying this backfield as well. So I think there's that contingent upside with him. Next up is going to be the guy we talked about, and that's going to be Kenny Gainwell, who now switched spots. Now, Kenny Gainwell now heading down to Tampa to take over for Rachaad White. Now, Gainwell had a breakout season last year, averaging 13 PPR points per game. He was incredible as a pass catcher, running 52% of the routes, and his 1.59 yard per route run ranked 7th. He finished with 73 catches, 486 receiving yards. Now, he was also really good on the ground, even just averaging 6.7 carries per game. He turned that into 537 rushing yards. He ended up with 8 total touchdowns. He didn't just excel, though, through the air. He finished with the 4th highest yards created per touch, 22nd in explosive run rate, and 15th in rushing success rate last year. Now in Tampa, he slides into the Rachaad White role. White last season averaged 10 touches per game and ran 45% of the total routes. I think Gainwell offers plenty of standalone value in PPR formats as the pass catcher out of this backfield. Let's not forget, Baker Mayfield is definitely one of the check down merchants, somebody that always finishes the top 5 of check down rate. So somebody like Kenneth Gainwell, I think, is a very good option in the later rounds. Lastly, Dylan Sampson. Last season, he received a 9% target share, but he was really good as a pass catcher. 1st in yards per route run, 9th in yards per reception, finished with 271 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Junkins is definitely going to be the lead back here. He's going to be the early down grinder, but he's never really been a pass catcher. And I think that's where Dylan Sampson come in. Let's not forget, Jerome Ford last year actually led this team in targets among the running backs with 32. He finished with 26 catches. He also ran the most routes. And so he is gone now. Not something we're going to have to worry about. I think Dylan Sampson is going to be a player that could get you 50 to 60 targets this year. And again, another player that I think has a lot of upside. And if something were to happen to Junkins, who's coming off a pretty significant injury, then Dylan Sampson, I think he has even more upside and could be like a low-end RB2. So Dylan Sampson is another player I think you can look to take. Lastly, I want to talk about a few more other players that are somebody that you could look to take in the later part at the last couple of picks of your draft. First is going to be Emmett Johnson. Now, Johnson has emerged as the number 2 running back behind Kenneth Walker after a very impressive debut in week 1. He also found the end zone in week 2 of the preseason. If you aren't familiar, Emmett Johnson comes from University of Nebraska. In his final year, he averaged 121 rushing yards per game, and he racked up 12 touchdowns. And he was also incredibly involved as a pass catcher with a 16% target share. Turned that into 46 receptions, 370 receiving yards, and 3 additional touchdowns. He is a solid all-around running back, somebody that is a very good pass catcher, is a very good early down back, and is a good complement to Kenneth Walker. Early, I thought it was going to be Amari DiMercato, but I'm starting to really believe that it's going to be Emmett Johnson. That's why I want to take some shots at him later in the draft, because I think he's somebody that's going to emerge to a little bit bigger of a role as the season goes by. And I think somebody that could end up providing you some very usable weeks as the season goes on. Now, lastly, let's just talk about a couple of handcuffs really quickly. Now, these are just straight handcuffs. They are really not going to offer you any sort of contingent upside. They're not going to offer you anything unless somebody in front of them gets hurt. And the first one is going to be Tank Bigsby with the Eagles. Last year, he was 4th in explosive run rate, 2nd missed tackles forced per attempt, and he was 1st in yards after contact per attempt. But his role only lies if Saquon Barkley goes down. But if that were to happen, he would have a weekly low-end RB1 candidate for sure on our hands. So Tank Bigsby is definitely somebody we can look at. Jonah Coleman, I think, is also a really interesting option. 4th-round pick by the Broncos. I think he is the direct backup to J.K. Dobbins. R.J. Harvey's role, I don't think, would change, and I think it would be Jonah Coleman that would step into that early down work. And the other guys you could talk about, I think, are Ray Davis, Brian Robinson, Malik Davis, Tyler Algier, Kalen Black from the San Francisco 49ers, who's had a very strong camp. And if something happened to CMC, then Kalen Black would be somebody that we definitely are going to be talking about. And then Braylon Allen has some sort of upside if Breece Hall were to go down as well. So I think those are the players we'll be looking at running back. Now let's move over to the wide receiver position. And first, now listen, I just talked about him, so I'm not going to really go on much of a spiel when it comes to Michael Pittman, but he falls into this because he's being drafted in the 10th round right now. And Michael Pittman, I think, makes a lot of sense tethered to Aaron Rodgers. I think the way he wins sets up really perfectly with Michael Pittman. So I really like Michael Pittman. If you haven't watched that video, go watch it. But Michael Pittman definitely falls in this range. Anyways, let's keep moving. Stefon Diggs, wide receiver 40. It took all offseason, but Diggs finally signed with the team. He landed with Washington, Jayden Daniels, and Terry McLaurin. Diggs in 2025 showed that he still has something left in the tank, even at 31 years old. He hauled in 85 passes for over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaged 12.4 PPR points per game. Even more impressive was his efficiency metrics. He ranked 7th in yards per route run, 19th in yards between pass attempts. He was also 3rd in first down per run rate and 18th in target separation. Diggs enters a very good situation with Jayden Daniels at quarterback. The Commanders' wide receiver room is very thin, so there's going to be plenty of target opportunity there for Diggs to be a big producer in this offense. I'm actually surprised that Diggs hasn't moved in already inside the top 36 among wide receivers right now. But if he's going to continue to go in the 9th round or the 40th wide receiver off the board, I am taking shots at him all day. Next up is going to be Jayden Reed. Now, I went back and forth to use him or Matthew Golden. I settled on Jayden Reed. Now, Reed had an injury plague 2025. He played in 5 healthy games with various injuries, mainly with a broken collarbone in week 2. Now, before last year, Jayden Reed averaged 11.6 and 13.6 PPR points per game. In 2024, he hauled in 55 passes for 857 yards and 7 touchdowns. That season, he utilized more as a deep threat with 11.4 yards per target and 15.6 yards per reception, both ranked inside the top 10 among wide receivers. Efficiency-wise, he was also very strong with a 2.35 yards per route run, which ranked 13th and ranked 2nd in target separation. One of the more frustrating aspects with any Packers wide receiver over the last 2 or 3 years has been how crowded that wide receiver room is. But now, this year, we're not really as concerned with that because we saw 135 targets, or over 50% of the wide receiver volume last year, now be vacated with Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks moving on. And so I think that this is going to be a little bit more of a consolidated passing room. I also think there's a real shot here that we see this team throw the ball a little bit more than they have in years past, mainly because I don't think this defense is going to be all that great with Green Bay. So Jayden Reed, I think, is a very strong option to finish as like a wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 2 upside. And I also like Matthew Golden as well, who's received a lot of really strong reports out of camp and through preseason. So both of these guys are players that I have on my radar. I just slightly prefer Jayden Reed. Next up is going to be the darling, the guy that's on a rocket ship right now, and that is Deshaun Stribling, wide receiver 49. We just talked about him last week, so I don't want to go too far in this because we've already talked about him, but I would be remiss to absolutely ignore him because I think it is absolute wheels up for Stribling. You have to remember right now you have Mike, who is still dealing with an injury right now, and that is concerning considering his age. And then you have also George Kittle, who's coming back from a significant injury. You have Deebo Samuel, who's not just fat, but also 30-plus years old. I think there is a lot of upside here for Stribling. I view him very similarly to like a Ricky Pearsall, where I'd have been comfortable drafting him. I think drafting Stribling in the 8th round of your drafts, I think it's perfectly okay. Now, he's still going right now in the 9th or 10th rounds of drafts. And so I really like him. I think there's a lot to like with this upside, and the upside is absolutely immense. Let's move over to Jalen Coker, wide receiver for 51. Coker missed the first 6 weeks of the season with an injury last year. While he took some time to acclimate, he did finish very strong. He was a top 24 wide receiver over his final 5 games, averaging over 12 PPR points per game. Let's not forget about the monster game he also had in the playoffs against the Rams, where he hauled in 9 for 134 and a score on 12 targets. Coker should be the wide receiver 2 next to Ted McMillan, and there's very little behind them. I don't love Bryce Young as a quarterback. As long as Coker can stay healthy, I think he can push for 100 targets this year, which would make him a very viable wide receiver 3/4 and someone we can plug in definitely during bye week. Next up is going to be Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver 57. It's easy to forget about Shaheed. Was a top 20 wide receiver over the first half of 2025 with the Saints. However, once he was acquired by the Seahawks, his impact came mainly through special teams than it did as a wide receiver. As a wide receiver, he ran just 67% of the routes, with it received just a 10% target share. But the Seahawks this offseason showed a lot of belief in him, bringing him back on a 3-year, $51 million deal over the offseason. And reports out of camp have been absolutely glowing. There's a reason for optimism here. I think he's going to be a much bigger part of the offense in 2026. Now, obviously, JSN is still the target hog in this offense, but with only 33-year-old Cooper Kupp behind him, who only topped 50 yards once after Shaheed was acquired, there's a lot of reasons to look at Shaheed as the wide receiver 2 on this team. And I think another player that has that wide receiver 3/4. Lastly, I want to hit on is Jacoby Lane. Now, the Ravens offense is going to look different this season. Isaiah Likely is now gone. And also, news came out that Rachaad Bateman was arrested for some domestic violence stuff. So I don't know what's going to happen with him. They also have an entirely new coaching staff with Jesse Minter coming in as the head coach, but more notably, they brought in Declan Doyle, taking over as the new OC. Now, Doyle spent time under Sean Payton and Ben Johnson. Now, Doyle's mantra this offseason has been to create explosive plays, which tracks coming from Ben Johnson's offense. Last season, Caleb Williams ranked top 5 in passes of 20-plus yards. And let's not forget, Lamar Jackson is one of the best deep ball passers entering the entire league. So where does Jacoby Lane fit in? Now, currently, he is absolutely crushing camp. Many longtime beat reporters for the Ravens have raved about how good he's looked. And most notably, Jameson Hensley said on Twitter, in 27 years of covering the Ravens, I'm not sure I've seen a rookie wide receiver have a training camp quite like Jacoby Lane. Now, Lane is a 6'4", 200-pound wide receiver. He was selected in the 3rd round out of USC. He profiles as an X-wide receiver. He should be on the field in 11 personnel, but with recent Bateman news, he could push to be the number 2 wide receiver in this offense. Now, if he can carve out a significant role in this offense, I think he could be a weapon inside the red zone. As Zay Flowers has never really been that guy. And last season, Zay received just 5 targets inside the 10-yard line. So I think there's a lot to like here, and there's a lot of upside here within this offense. Now, this offense is one that we've always used to think about as a run-heavy offense. I don't know if they're going to be that way this year. I think there's going to be some switch here to them throwing a lot more than they typically do. And I think this is going to be a team looking to push the ball down the field, and that is why they added somebody like Jacoby Lane. So I think there's a lot to like here with him, and he is somebody that you can get at the very end of your drafts. You don't have to spend heavy draft capital on him. That being said, let me know in the comments section below who is your favorite player to draft in the later part of the draft, and who is your sleeper pick for 2026. Let's see you on the next one. Bye.